This week's Torah portion, Parshat Ekev, beginning with verse 12 of Deuteronomy 7, Moses continues the beautiful review to the generation that is about to enter into Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, and before taking his leave of them, is painting a panoramic review of the experiences in the desert, emphasizing the vitality of God's commandments, the vibrancy of their relationship with God, the centrality of the land of Israel in their lives, and going over the promises that God made to the people of Israel based on his great love for the forefathers, speaking about not fearing those nations that lived then in the land, and all the promises that would come true. Very beautiful review, exhortation, and emphasis on some of the commandments. And it all begins with a verse that states, that's verse 12 of chapter 7, "And it shall come to pass." This is how it's usually translated. If you will listen, if you will hearken to these laws and keep them and do them, then the Lord your God will watch over you, and he will keep the covenant and the kindness that he swore to your forefathers. And our sages make an issue of the Hebrew word that is used here in this verse, verse 12, V'haya Ekev tishmu'un, which is translated as if or verily or something like that. If you will indeed listen, pay attention to these laws. But the Hebrew, which of course is so telling and so revealing, the roots of the language of the Bible, the Hebrew that is used here, Ekev, the name of this Torah portion, is really the same word which refers to the heel of the foot. And our sages make an important kind of point on this idea that what the verse is really emphasizing is the importance of paying attention to even those commandments, as Rashi tells us, that are easy, that seem to be very small, it seems to be very perhaps insignificant, that seem to not be as important as other commandments, those commandments that a person may have a tendency to trample underfoot. If you'll even listen to those commandments, if you'll even take those seemingly lenient or unimportant or lesser commandments seriously, then certainly all of these great things will come to pass, and God will in fact uphold the covenant that he swore with your forefathers and keep the kindness that he promised. So there is a concept here that is being alluded to in this first verse, that there are certain commandments that perhaps a person has a tendency to basically treats in a more light-hearted manner, perhaps in a disdainful manner, perhaps subconsciously, but in a manner that does not bespeak how one would normally relate to the commandments of the king. Because these commandments, it's perceived perhaps even subconsciously that they're just not of the same import, of the same power, of the same significance as the great commandments that are encrusted with destiny and purpose. Don't kill, don't steal. And then there are some commandments, and perhaps it isn't even necessary really to define which ones they are, because for every single person it may be something else. There may be a tendency for us to think in our minds, well, certainly everything is holy and we want to uphold God's word and we want to do everything the right way, but, this is not as important. This is something, it's kind of a minor observance, this is a nice way to be, but it certainly isn't that important. And basically, what our sages are emphasizing is that we don't have the ability to discern, we don't have the right, we don't have the vessels to measure what's important in God's eyes. And that even those commandments that we may take for granted, that we may somehow, again, not consciously, hopefully, but that we may somehow assume that they are less important and that they count less, and therefore we're kind of lax about them, or lackadaisical. We act with a little bit of flippancy regarding those commandments. So the verse opens by telling us, yes, these commandments, Ekev Tishmu'un, listen even, pay attention even to those commandments that you may have a tendency to sweep under the carpet, to treat a bit disdainfully. Perhaps everything is riding on those commandments. Perhaps the fulfillment of God's word, the promise, the chesed, the kindness that he swore to our forefathers, depends on how seriously we take his word. And we are not the ones who decide and who measure what's important and what's not important, because we don't have the ability to ascertain the importance of the commandments or the reward for them. And it's very, very possible that the reward for what might appear to us to be a very slight commandment is even greater than that which we assume is such a powerful, important commandment. And the reason for that is because God measures how seriously we take things and knows that it's very easy psychologically for us to take something that seems to be very insignificant and very minor, to take that for granted. And we don't know how He measures things, and we want to show our diligence and our obedience and our love for Him, who He's always there for us. We want to show Him that we open up our hearts to the words of His Torah, and that we want to take every single one of His commandments just as seriously, not knowing where they fall, not knowing what the measure is, just knowing that His words are the greatest advice that He's given to us, the conduits to bring about spiritual blessing for ourselves and for the whole world.